Hey, Senda.
Hey, Phil.
What do we do when we have 3 questions that are all worth answering, but none of them are really its own show?
Yeah, that means it's time for a grab bag.
Oh, we haven't done that in a while.
No, we haven't.
Alrighty. Then it's the May grab bag. May I grab your bag?
Oh, no.
Cue music. And welcome to another episode of Panda Talking Games. I am your host, Phil, who likes to grab bags.
And I am your other host, Senda. I don't know what to do with that one.
Answer honestly.
It's too much innuendo. I can't sort it out fast enough on the fly.
Well, now we should probably just move along from that awkward opening.
Anyway, tonight we're going to answer hopefully 3 questions, unless we go really long, in which case it'll end up getting split up. But our first question comes to us from John on the forums, and I'm going to read the whole thing, so there's a bunch to it. Bear with me. Here we go. You ready?
I am ready.
Yes. Okay. There are a number of games that provide some sort of resource or currency for players when they make an in-character decision or action that fits their character but makes their life harder / the character to the situation more interesting. Ooh, I skipped a line. Also, when a GM encourages a character to act in a certain way, perhaps due to a flaw or a trait, or when the GM makes the situation more... Wow, I have failed to read this entirely. Am I going to have to edit this episode? Because I'm going to try that again. Okay. Also, when a GM encourages a character to act in a certain way, perhaps due to a flaw or trait, or the case of a GM intrusions where a player / character gets rewarded when the GM makes the situation more difficult. Thinking of games like Fate, Cypher System, Burning Mill, etc. as matching some or all of these. Cool, yes. Sometimes these decisions / intrusions impact more than just the character getting rewarded, though. They might derail a goal for the entire table, for instance. This can cause frustration. How would you handle these frustrations as a player or a GM? Or is this a symptom of a mismatch between player preferences and game style?
Okay, so first...
That's a bunch.
So first of all, I believe on Misdirected Mark, we addressed this mechanic.
Yes.
So specifically, we're talking...
In economies, yeah.
Yeah, we're talking about things like... the Fate Compel, the GM intrusion from the Cypher System, the flaws from Savage Worlds, and those kinds of things, right? So we're talking about mechanics where a player gets a reward for allowing something about their character to make the scene more complicated.
Yes.
Right. And then the larger question is, well, what happens if in doing so, it has made it more complicated for everyone?
Or for more than just that one player.
Yeah. For everyone, for who, like somebody else, etc.
Somebody else, yeah.
Yeah. So, boy, there's a number of things that we kind of need to tackle in this, right? So one of these things is definitely expectation setting, right? As hinted to in the question.
Yes, it is. And because when these games are played, like there is an expectation that like this could happen. Like any of these flaws or traits could come up at any time at the table specifically to make things more difficult. And that's why they're there.
Right. So setting expectations and just understanding how the game works is going to be the first part of this.
Yeah.
Part of this is also going to be a system / GM mastery thing.
Yeah.
And that is kind of knowing the art of how to engage these mechanics and when to engage them as not to create problems when tensions might be running high.
Yeah.
Like compels aren't always the best thing, like in the middle of the climactic battle scene. I'm not saying there isn't a time to use them, There absolutely is. But by and large, like, your safer compels are in like little side scenes. They're in personal arcs. They're in like the early investigation phases, like, where you're doing like, like you're looking around and looking for clues and stuff like that. Like when stakes and tensions are lower, like that's a better time to kind of hit with one of these things.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
Agree. Yep. I was sitting here thinking about my experience mostly as a player, just to kind of line that up, and like that is definitely when I'm most excited to take them. Because there's also a trust situation, right?
Oh, like we're gonna have to get to the
trust situation with. Okay, should I leave that? Are you coming to it?
If you will put a pin in it for just 2 seconds, I'll finish this thought. We'll go right over to trust.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so yeah, the other part of this is that you got to think of these economies, right? The ebb and flow of these economies, as also kind of the almost in a way like the beat structure of a story, right? Like, you want to make things complicated and give players, I'm going to just use fate as an example, right? You want to compel and give players fate points in the rising action of the story, so that when they reach the climax, they're kind of loaded for bear, and they can do some pretty awesome things. And if you're playing Savage Worlds, that's absolutely what you want to do. Is like,
right? You want to stack up on the bennies.
Yeah, exactly. You want to load up on those bennies heading into the climactic scenes. And then the last thing. Nope, I'll save that. I'll save that point that I'm going to make about spreading the love or spreading the reward. So we'll do that after truth.
We'll do that after.
Right. So again, just to kind of recap, right, there's a little bit of GM mastery about knowing when to engage these things, and it has a little to do with kind of the pacing of your game.
Right. So it's even when you say GM mastery in this particular case, it's less specific rules mastery and more generalized storytelling beat structure mastery.
It's really both, right? So
fair enough.
Because it's knowing where you are in the story, but knowing how to engage the rules properly in those moments
to make the beats happen. Yeah.
So fair there's enough. There's a little bit of both going on.
Right. So the trust thing goes hand in hand with that, which is that I, as a player, need to trust that in taking this compel, because I want to take the compel, like, and I know that's not all players, right? Me personally, I love when things are more complicated, so I want to take that compel. But I need to know that even though you're making the situation more complicated for me, the player, you're not doing it to like get back at me or like specifically screw me over, but that you are also interested in what cool thing happens when the situation is more complicated, right? So there's also a GMing style and a table trust / culture situation that has to happen with that to make that kind of thing work. Because if I, the player, think that you are truly just trying to screw me over, probably not going to want to take that compel. And eventually I'm going to be forced to take that compel, depending on the mechanic. There may come a point where like I, the player, don't actually have a choice, or with GM intrusions, I may not have a choice, right? And that can be the beginning of the frustrations, right? And that's even if we're just talking about a single player. But the question is really about, what about when me accepting that compel also affects the player sitting next to me? And I think the key part of the actual question here, and it goes back to what I was just saying, when you don't have a choice, right? The player next to me did not consent to this intrusion. I did, right? Because I said, it's about my character. Cool. I accept the fate point. And they're like, I really don't want this thing to happen to my character. Right? Like, okay.
Yeah.
So, and I think this is what you were about to get to.
Yeah. So there may need to be a couple of social conventions, right? Like maybe a little house ruling to get into this, right? So one of them is the idea that that if somebody else is integral to the scene, that they could also have the ability to say no or whatever.
Right.
Because
that's they should also, that's the consent part. But they should also share in the rewards for having to deal with a more difficult situation if it's directly affecting their character.
Well, and
right?
so that is the flip side of this, right? So,
Yes.
so first of all, we should always take consent into account, right?
Yeah.
So, I try very hard to hit up a lot of compels when characters are alone.
Yeah, when it doesn't directly affect other characters.
Correct. It may indirectly affect them through the play of the story.
The story is going to affect them. Yeah,
but that's different.
Let's set this up for the sake of clarity, right?
Mm-hmm.
The difference between this is I'm in a room by myself and you compel my curiosity killed the cat, right? So I open the trap door that I know probably leads to the haunted basement.
Sure.
And something happens, right? And the other players hear a scream.
Yep.
Okay. Cool. Fine, right? But that's a thing that happened directly to me.
Right. Now also we need to take
sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say
Boy, we don't have notes tonight, y'all.
So what I think is important here is that we've all agreed to play this game and we all know that this is a mechanic that comes up in the game.
Yes.
Right? So when you're alone and I compel you to go do something that gets you into more trouble, other players shouldn't be super mad about that because that's how this game is played. And if you don't like how this game is played, then this may not be the right game for you. Right?
Right. And that's totally fine.
Now, that's a separate situation of you and Professor Fox are in a room.
Yes.
And I compel your curiosity kills the cat and you pull a lever and now the walls start closing in on the two of you and both of you may be killed.
Or I push the button and the trapdoor underneath her opens.
Yes. So in those right. So in those cases, your action, while you got compelled for it, has directly, and I think that's the key word here,
directly and negatively
impacted another character. Now,
yes.
So the first part of this we just said was there can always be an option to there can always be an option to say no. Another thing you can do as a GM, and I don't think this is cheating, is I could compel you to go pull the lever, right?
Uh-huh.
But Professor Fox might be like, oh, no. And I'll be like, cool, make me an athletics check to stop, right? To stop you before you pull it, right? Because I still compelled you. You were going to go pull the thing, but I've given the person in the room an opportunity to intervene. That's another solution.
Right.
And then lastly, the final solution is, and this was actually my solution for Cypher, and I'll talk about Cypher in a second. The other one is you could just reward both of them. Well, you pulled the thing and now you both fell down you both fell in the pit. Here's a fate point for each of you.
Yeah, you both get points because you both experienced the negative consequences.
Right. So Cypher has this weird mechanic where when you do a GM intrusion on a player, you intrude and then you give them an XP and then they give one other player at the table for no reason. They just give them an XP, which is nice, right?
It's just nice. Okay.
But in a 3-player game, like I was playing, that means that every time somebody gets an intrusion, one person isn't getting an XP.
Just one person isn't getting an XP.
Right.
That's sad.
And so I just in general don't like the one extra XP rule. So the first house rule we made for Cypher was, if I take a GM intrusion to complicate the story by directly intervening into the narrative, everybody gets an XP.
Yeah.
And that was a really easy fix. That was a really easy way to say, look, the mechanics of this game allow me at various times in the game to intercede and make things more complicated. I can have a wall crumble. I can have, all sorts of like things happen in the moment that are unexpected. I could have an extra monster like Kool-Aid Man into the scene, right? But my
yeah.
oh no.
Oh no.
So my philosophy for it was like, look, when the heavy hand of the GM presses down on the game, everybody gets a reward.
Yeah.
And my players took to that in 2 seconds. Like that was a very easy, it was a super easy solution to the problem. Because everybody got a reward for it. And really, that's what everybody wants.
This sucks. Yeah, this situation just got harder, but I got rewarded for experiencing this harder situation. Cool, now everybody's happy. Versus like, oh, I pulled the lever and I'm standing here like, ooh, how fun, the lever opened a trap door and Andy is falling to her death. Maybe Andy doesn't feel so good about that if she didn't also get rewarded for it.
Well, and then I think we need to go back
in that situation.
We need to go back to the trust thing, which is, and this is a thing I have always told players when I'm teaching Fate, like to new players, is like, my compel is not going to.
It's not going to murder you.
It's not going to murder you. It's not going to derail any of your progress or anything like that. The goal of the compel is to make things more interesting by making things more complicated.
Yeah.
So
compels. So when it comes right down to it, like this was a drastic example, like the, like pull the lever, someone dies kind of situation, just to really illustrate the kind of situation that we're talking about.
But the walls closing in is a reasonable one because that's still like
is a reasonable one. You still have time to react.
Exactly.
And you're still going to do stuff in that room, right?
So in that case, maybe here's the branching things I would allow to happen. One, I would allow Professor Fox to pay off the compel.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like if Professor Fox was like, oh, no,
be like,
here's a fate point. Go away, GM.
I'm going to stop you from even thinking about that.
Right.
Yep.
I would allow that.
I'll pay it. Yep.
Number 2, I would definitely allow a check. Like I might have like, okay, well, you're reading the hieroglyphics, Professor Fox, while Senda's walking around the room. You know what? Do me a favor. Make me a quick observation check. Like
so that she might catch my finger just drifting down to the giant button that says do not push. Yeah.
Right? Like, oh, you grab her by the wrist before she activates the trap, right?
Right.
So that's a compel plus, because here's the thing. People be like, well, but what was the complication? Well, now like the reading of the hieroglyphics has been derailed and has to be restarted.
Yeah.
Right. So time has been lost.
Could still start closing in if she didn't succeed, right? Because there's also interest in the like diving across the room. No, and then I push the button anyway.
Exactly, right. So I would allow the check. So I would allow the buy off the compel. I'd allow the check, and then I would allow a veto, right? Like if a player was like, oh, like this is uncool. Like maybe neither player has points. I would allow that. And then finally, the other one, which I would be comfortable with, is just being like, well, she pushes the button. Here's the fate point for each of you.
Yeah.
Any one of those is actually a valid solution to them. And you probably, as we tie off this question, really just need to have, like, if you're playing a game where you have this mechanic and you're not familiar with it, it's worth having a little discussion about just that situation.
Yeah.
And what convention would you like to have for that? Like if everybody is everybody comfortable, just everybody gets, everybody involved in the scene gets the reward.
Right.
Maybe that's all you need.
And also anyone that it directly affects can pay off the compel, because that's a fixes a lot of the consent issues. Or I mean, that was a very fate specific example because there's not always ways for you to pay that off. But
yeah, I mean,
you get
like
the idea.
Like in the case of Cypher, right? There's no actually
there's no stopping you really. Is
not
there?
really. I don't think so. I think the GM can just pay that.
I mean, you could X card it if it was a safety issue.
Sure.
But
okay.
Yeah.
Cool. I think that's a good good first question.
Cool.
What's our next question?
Our next question comes from Ryan, who is Lord Neptune on Twitter. Boy, I was just on his podcast. It was temporarily my podcast. Just so y'all know, you can go hear me for a long time because we recorded for a long time on the Character Creation Cast. So if you want to hear way too much of me, you can. Anyway, Ryan said, "Hey, pandas, have you covered how to play with a bunch of GMs who run the same systems a tad differently from one another? My friends and I used to play/run Heroes Unlimited and generally rotated GMs in the same mega campaigns, but our GMing styles were fairly different. Curious as to your thoughts on how to be a good player when the GM is doing things a different way than what you would do, parenthesis, avoiding backseat GMing, etc."
Okay, so we gotta tease apart two things here.
Yeah.
Okay. So this situation one is pretty common,
Yes.
where a group of people run a game and they rotate GMs. That's cool.
Yep.
That's cool.
I've done that.
I haven't done that a ton, but I've done that.
Andy and I did that. We had a shared world. We had a shared overarching plot plan. We had everything.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, totally cool. So I want to tease apart two parts of this. The first one is mechanically. Mm-hmm. So is everybody running the game mechanically the same? Because if they're not, like, let's have that discussion.
Yeah.
You know, and again, the example that Ryan used was Heroes Unlimited, which I will tell you, it's no champions, but it's no walk in the park either.
Right. So there are definitely times when people could interpret rules differently.
It's definitely possible that people I played Palladium, I think, incorrectly for most of my teen years, but liked my incorrect play better than the actual play.
Yeah, you know.
So the thing is, if you have a group of GMs and you're rotating through and not everybody's using the rules the same, that could be pretty jarring, right?
Yeah.
So the best thing you can do in that case is to just put all of you put your opinions in the pot and come up with a standard methodology for running the game. Like,
yeah.
You know, hey, we're all going to use this house rule, or hey, none of us are using this house rule, or, you know, hey, let's all just be clear, this is how initiative works, like this is how dodging works, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
and get everybody on the same page.
Yeah.
Because I think that one...
And maybe write it down if this is a long, ongoing campaign where there might be something... Yep, there might be something that, like, you figure it out at the beginning and then you forget about it for 6 months and then it suddenly comes up again 100%. And you have a reference sheet, right?
100%. Just open up a Google Doc. Every GM has access to it. It is your gaming conventions. Now, if you're running this thing off on your own, you run it your own favorite way with your own house rules or whatever. But when you run it in the mega group, you know, in the circle of GMs, everybody runs it in this configuration. And that just that's the McDonald's effect, right? So, you know, anywhere I go in the world and I order, you know, cheeseburger at McDonald's, I get a cheeseburger, right? Like it's that same experience.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the first part. And I think that one's relatively easy to address, which is we all agree, we all come to a consensus on the rule set we're going to play with.
Yeah.
The next part is GM style, which Ryan references in the question.
Yes, which is a whole different can of worms, isn't it? Because you can't really ask a GM to change their GMing style. Like, I have tried to run things in the style of other people's games, and it doesn't work.
No, I will say this, right? So when it comes to GMing style, I don't think there's really much you can do about it. Other than if the GM is just trying to, like, break tropes, right? So in the case of a superhero game, they're, like, you know, trying to make it ultra realistic or something like that, right? So as long as there's some understanding, like, hey, we're all playing a Silver Age comic, or we're all playing a 90s Steel Age comic. Like, as long as you establish the genre and tone, then I think you got to let GMs just GM their way. And I would take it as akin to, to extend the comic book metaphor, when a comic book gets picked up by a different writer.
Right.
Right. So the characters are the same, the setting's the same, but the new writer, they got different ideas for how this thing's going to go. And, you know, the way one writer writes, you know, the Fantastic Four is very different from how another one writes the Fantastic Four, but it's still the Fantastic Four. And, Same thing with the Avengers, right? Like the Avengers, the X-Men, like they've all had writers over the years for different things. And people have favorites, right? I mean, like, some people dig like the Bendis run of the X-Men, or the current run of the X-Men that's going on by Hickman. Or you might be like, I mean, I actually like Hickman's run too, but but I'm also like, classically a Claremont fan, right? But those are like, and those are tonal, right? Those are how, quote, they were GM'd.
Yeah.
Right? So the stories they told, the tone, the subtext, if we're using Jason Pitt's 4 structures, right? The subtext of each run is different. I don't think you mess with that too much.
Yeah, I don't think you really can. And part of that is, I think it's very difficult as a GM to try to run something in a style that is not yours, especially for a long period of time, like if you're running the arc of a mega campaign, which is in itself a campaign, right? Like I could maybe fake someone else's style for a one-shot. I certainly can't do it for a campaign. And if I did, honestly, the other thing that happens is me as a GM, I'm not actually having fun necessarily, because I'm not getting to do the things, where I may not be able to get to do the things or all of the things that I get out of running a game, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's nobody wants to like take the, the seat at the table and then specifically be like, okay, but I can't do these 5 things that I really like doing. Yeah,
I mean, like if, for instance, like one person's specialty is running like really kick-ass team-on-team combats. Yeah. And so like when they're the GM, like you're fighting the masters of evil, you're fighting like one big team after another, and it's awesome. And then the next player comes in and it's still superheroes, and you're still having superheroes fights, but they are like way more about secret identities and the messy lives of superheroes or whatever. Like I would say in this case, you embrace that. Like,
yeah,
like just turn in and just like turn into it and just embrace the idea that like, hey, we're going to take these characters through some, like, we're each going to have a chance to kind of interpret the world for these characters.
Yeah. And one of the things that we're going to gain from this experience and passing the GM seat around is specifically seeing the world through these different lenses and these characters through these different lenses.
Yeah, there's a what is it? There's a comic book series. It was a short-lived comic book series, which I adore, called Global Frequency. And one of the key things to Global Frequency is that while the writer remained the same throughout like the 12 issues, every issue had a different artist.
Interesting.
And so every issue looks different.
Yeah.
And some of them have like, like real anime comic book style, like just, like really traditional comic book style looks. Some of them are a little more sketchy and abstract, like, but the idea was like each artist kind of took the story and interprets it.
Yeah.
Expresses it with their style. Yeah. And I would say you just embrace that with GMing as well. You just embrace everybody's style. As long as, once again, it's not trying to break genre, harm anyone, or anything like that.
Yeah. And I think, to speak specifically to the backseat GMing part, I think that the thing that really helps with that, in particular, backseat GMing, is having had the mechanics conversation, right? Like, so that mechanical stuff is all on the same page, and then acknowledging that stylistically you're here to enjoy a different type of story than the one that you might be telling, because now you're just talking about narrative decisions instead of having debates about rules at the table.
Yeah. No, totally down with that. I think that would actually, in some ways, could be a lot of fun.
It actually seems pretty cool. Like, I'm kind of like, I would want to pass the GMing seat around maybe more often, right? Like, because I actually think it'd be cool to like flip that lens around faster.
Yeah.
To like contrast things. That's just cool. And it's interesting. Like in my group, we tend to pass the GMing seat around constantly but we don't run the same game over and over. Right?
Yeah. I rarely do it as well, and I think it might be kind of fun to.
Yeah,
It's kind of fun thought experiment.
It'd be interesting to get together a bunch of people who are comfortable either doing short planning or kind of improving from what exists, and then getting 4 or 5 people at a table and being like, we're all going to GM this game. And then everybody GMs one session.
Yeah.
Right? Like you just literally pass it around the table, one each, and just like see what happens. It'd be like the gaming GMing version of the improv game where you do
I'll
one
tell you the
word
game.
back
I'll
and
tell you the
forth.
game you do it with.
Oh, what game?
Star Trek.
Ooh, because then episodically it makes...
Because different directors.
Yeah.
There's always been different directors on Star Trek, and they all come in with, different stories and their own ways of shooting them and stuff like that. And,
There you go.
and
Wouldn't even blink at that.
oh, it'd be so easy to just have like and in a large, like in a circle of GMs, like it would be easy to have a rotating staff of a troupe of characters, because as one person picks up a GMing spot, somebody just, picks up like another bridge crew member.
Yes.
Like we just
you could just do that for years.
Yeah, we're just not taking Phil's character on the away mission.
Right?
This mission, right? Like, because Phil's GMing.
Z finally gets their time in the spotlight.
Right. Kick Paris out of that.
Kick Paris out of that chair. Anyway, all of that aside, do you think we covered that one? Do you think
I think we covered it. I feel comfortable. We talked about mechanical and GMing style, and that was the two things I wanted to touch on.
Cool. All right, so we got one more question tonight, and that question came to us from Tony Ruback in the Slack room, our Patreon Slack, and they said, got a question for Pandas. What are some best practices for gaming one-on-one, whether using things like NBA Solo Ops or Cthulhu Confidential or standard games? How can we help players get unstuck and progress the story when they don't have anyone to bounce ideas off of?
So many years ago.
Yeah.
Like 2, I think.
Like
2 or 3.
before, pre-pandemic.
Yeah.
Which
2 or 3.
means eons ago, right?
Yeah, like after Skill Monkey and I forget what the
Oh no, something man in Skill Monkey. Oh dear.
Yes. Anyway, some of our past listeners will know.
Smash Man? Something?
I don't know.
Oh, somebody tell us. We've forgotten our own characters.
At one point, we toyed around with the idea of doing some one-on-one AP. I think we were all just kind of in amazement of the mini APs that the Gauntlet was doing, and we toyed with the idea of doing them on the show, and it never.
We did them. We actually did several of them.
We did, but it never really took. And people weren't really here for that.
No.
People came for the talky parts or the laughy parts, which is okay.
They came for the beefness.
But a while ago, we did a whole thing on one-on-one play and some of the challenges. And so you can definitely go back and look for that episode. I don't know if we'll remember which one it was, but just,
I don't know.
You know what? Start at 1, listen,
just work your way forward.
Work your way forward. You'll find it eventually. But to go back to the actual question, some of the challenges on one-on-one play, and this gets into idea facilitation, right? So one of the challenges when you're playing one-on-one is that you don't have other players to bounce ideas off of. And you also not only don't have other players to bounce ideas off of, but you also don't have other players to feed ideas when you are tapped out, right? One of the things that we talked about in that episode is that when you do one-on-one play, the spotlight's on your character the whole time.
Always. Yeah, there is no downtime.
Right. Yeah. There's no, in a regular game, you're in the spotlight some fraction based on the number of people at your table, like 1/5 of the time, that's not completely accurate because, multiple people in scenes, whatever. But the idea being that, you're not always under the gun and you're not always the one that needs to have a solution, right? If you are having a slow moment, and Bob across the table comes up with the solution for how to break into the prince's bedroom, then you're just like, yeah, let's do that. I'm in support of it. But when you are playing one-on-one and you draw a blank on how to break into the prince's bedroom, where do you turn? And the most obvious is you turn to the GM. Through NPCs.
Well, through NPC, I mean, yes, through NPCs, I think is one good way to do it. But I also think that as the facilitator of a one-on-one game, you don't have to play the role of the impartial moderator who is never going to hint or help the players or anything, right? Like, I don't think that it's an issue, especially in a one-on-one game like that, to say to someone to notice that they're having trouble coming up with an idea, or in my case, I will literally say like, "Wow, I have no idea what to do with this situation," and for the GM to say something like, "Cool, what if there was like, a big rusty lock on the door, and you could see that it was sort of loose, right?" Like, I can give you, me as a GM, I can give you ideas about ways that I think might be interesting solutions and you can take and do or run or be inspired by. They could be NPCs who are then interacting with you to give you thoughts or ideas or whatever, but they also could just be me manipulating the world to give you cool things to feed your creativity, right? And so, like, I don't know. I mean, I think it's really key in a one-on-one game when it is a game of facilitator and player. I think it's really key to remember in those situations, because there is a little bit of power dynamic, that it is still on both of the people playing the game to tell a story together. And I think it's more important in those circumstances because you don't have anyone else to rely on. And because frequently, especially if you're playing a game that's not necessarily like pointed specifically at solo play, it may not have a lot of tools to assist you in creating that shared, like, collaborative space. So it's really important to just remember that that's what you're doing and be very intentional about it, especially as a GM. Like, it is just not the place for a combative GMing style. It is the place for collaboration so that, if there aren't any NPCs in this scene, I, the GM, can still help you out, right? Because we're here to tell this cool story together in the most interesting way possible. And it's really interesting to me because for some reason, it is harder in that situation where it's like there's a GM and then like the spotlight shining at the one character at all times, versus, which is really interesting because one of my favorite types of games to play are in fact 2-player games that are just two players, don't have a facilitator, but have the same sort of intimacy of storytelling collaborative experience. And I think that it's worth taking like that really shared narrative space and applying it when you are a facilitator player in that situation as two people. I tried to do some TikToks about this a while ago, actually, but like 60 seconds did not do it. I could not.
I don't even
possibly
I don't know how I could do anything in a TikTok. Like, I can barely define my terms and like.
I couldn't. Like, it took me 2, and I barely got through anything because I was trying to explain, like, 2-player games in that collaborative narrative space. And it is, yeah. So I guess that's, for me, what it would come down to is remembering that it's a shared narrative collaborative space, and that I, as a GM, have just as much responsibility for keeping the story moving forward and keeping the ideas flowing as the player does. So it is not on me to tell the story and them to react to the story. When you've only got 2 people, you both got to kind of both do everything.
I agree.
Yeah.
I will go back to what I said before about using some NPCs, right? Because a nice way to kind of help, like, so everything that you said is absolutely true. At a meta level, you can just totally, between two, like player and GM, have that discussion, solve it, and continue on in the game. Totally legit, totally valid way to play.
Or in game even, but yes.
Right. But the way you do it in game is you do it through NPCs, right? So if your solo game is Sherlock, then the GM is playing Watson.
Yeah, sure.
Right. And Watson then becomes a tool by which I can help move things along.
You can feed information that maybe the player isn't picking up on.
I can provide a piece of insight or ask a question, right? So the thing to consider is that when you look at like these solo games, I shouldn't say solos, these one-on-ones, and if you look at them in terms of kind of like matching them up to movies, right? If you look at like a James Bond movie, James Bond is never alone.
Yeah.
Right? Like
it's definitely a one-on-one game.
It's a one-on-one game, but there's Felix is kicking around and Q is somewhere and like, right? So like there's always going to be, for that like solo hero, there's always going to be like a support system. Yeah. There's always going to be the guy in the van or the guy in the chair. If you like, so the guy in the van, if we go back to True Lies, the guy in the chair, if we're at Spider-Man, Homecoming, but you want to build your campaign such that you've built in NPCs that are going to be persistent, that will stay with the character to be the conduit for when you want to do those things in game. And again, sometimes you won't want to do it in game. Sometimes you'll just have that discussion at the people level. But other times when you want to do it in game, you want to have those tools. Your Sherlock has a Watson. Your wandering knight has a squire.
Yes.
Right? That like, or a bard that follows you around.
It shows up.
Yeah. Like, like those kinds of, even like, I mean, even Xena had,
Gabriel.
Yeah. Although I mean,
was it Gabrielle?
Gabrielle,
I don't know.
And I loved her. And I over the course of that series, I think of her less as a sidekick and more of her own protagonist. But then there were a host of other characters that would show up right along the way.
I will admit to you honestly, I only watched Xena over at one specific friend's house, so I have only seen like a weird smattering of episodes and have no concept of how the show goes as a whole in any way, shape, or form.
Let me tell you, you will enjoy this show, and we should someday watch it because it's fantastic. It is. Well, we'll do that we'll get to that in the Bamboo Lounge. Okay, so I think we've actually covered this topic pretty well, which is one, don't be afraid to have that quote meta level conversation. Just have it like Senda said. And two, if you don't want to break immersion, then establish NPCs that can provide advice so that you have a method in game to be able to have that conversation, because you can have this conversation when you're stuck in two levels. GM and player can have that conversation, talk about what to do to resolve it, and then keep moving. Or the player could be talking to their sidekick, associate, NPC, and they're having that same conversation, but only within the context of the story.
Yeah. And it's interesting. So the thing that I will say is, having played actually quite a few games like this, because on SassGeek, Andy and I played quite a few games.
Sure, you did.
And with both of us in the GM seat, and we flipped back and forth a bunch, right? And we did both of these things a ton, constantly, frequently on the mics. Sometimes we cut the meta level stuff out of the mics because sometimes the meta level stuff was like, okay, we've been recording for 2 hours. We need to find a resolution, right?
Sure. We need to land this thing right here.
Yeah. Like, how do we get there? And it is okay. It's okay to do that even when you're not recording. It's okay to even pause and say, I would really like to get to this point, at a meta level and get there. And that's totally okay. It's also totally okay to stay immersed in the game and fix it in an in-character way, right? Mm-hmm. All of those things are great.
Yeah.
But basically be collaborative and tell a story together.
Yeah. Just you're not, it's, even though it's just you and the GM, it's still not adversarial.
Yeah.
Also, a last note to this before we wrap it up.
Sure.
Also, and we said this in the episode as well. Seriously look at the system that you're going to use for this.
Yeah, make sure it's one that isn't going to hurt your solo player, like, just because they're alone. Like, make sure it's not one that's going to ding them for not having a party of 5.
Correct. Exactly. 100% on that, right? 100%. And, if you need to, I just wrote this whole article last month in Gnome Stew about how to play without certain roles or niches in your game, right? You can always, modify your game a little to fill in some of those things. For instance, and again, this goes right back. And as soon as I make this shameless plug, we do have to end the show.
We do. But you got to make a plug.
If you wanted to play one-on-one Dungeon World, and we're concerned about not having all the roles present, there is a supplement that you can purchase called the Legacy Weapon.
It's really good.
Which is designed for exactly this purpose, which allows a character to wield a weapon the weapon has past lives and confers upon the wielder different abilities from different playbooks.
Yep.
It's a thing.
Playbooks being its past lives. It's actually really, really cool, and it's very fun, and potentially lets you play a lot of different characters. Yeah, no, it's really neat. It's a really neat little supplement.
That was a fun supplement to make, and a fun supplement to play test. Anyway, when we start making shameless plugs of our own products, it is time for us to conclude the grab bag and get moving towards the conclusion of the show. But in order to do that, first, you got to tell me about another show on the Misdirected Mark Network. Yeah,
I'm going to tell you tonight about Bone, Stone, and Obsidian. On Bone, Stone, and Obsidian, Jesse and Robert take monthly deep dives, into the Dark Sun setting and discuss it across all of the editions of D&D. I hear there are cactuses. I don't know if I know that
Sometimes, unless a wizard casts a spell and they all die.
What? Now? What now? What?
That's called a defiler.
Wow.
That's a wizard that every time they cast magic, it kills living things around them. And so they literally contribute to the desert by every time they cast, they kill vegetation.
Wow. That sounds intense.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, Dark Sun's awesome. Dark Sun's awesome for that reason and so many more reasons.
I mean, the funny thing is, this is way off topic, and I will say it, and then we will finish concluding this show. I have one of the original Dark Sun setting books in my drawer for like a really old edition of D&D. I don't even remember.
Probably second edition,
because I used to work with the gentleman who wrote a bunch of the monsters.
Well, that's cool.
It's pretty cool. He used to come in and see me when I taught people how to use their computers. He was delightful, and he brought me dice and a bunch of old D&D supplements that he had worked on, which was very kind of him. They're super neat. I just have them.
Yeah, no.
Have them in my drawer.
I'm going to have to take a look next time.
Speaking of collecting versus playing games. Anyway,
Senda.
Yeah.
How do people find us on the internet?
Well, you can find us on Twitter at Pandas Talk Games. You can find us in the Misdirected Mark forums, which is forums.misdirectedmark.com. Or you can drop us an email, panda@misdirectedmark.com. Or you can find us both on the Tiki-Talkies if you would like to have the audio of your question played back to you upon our podcast. We haven't forgotten you, Karen. It was just such a good question. We still haven't answered it yet.
Karen, that question requires work.
It requires research. We don't even have
really
notes
been in a
tonight.
Research place.
Oh, man, but it was a good question. Anyway, good.
Okay.
And once they have found us in one of those places, what can they do with that information?
Yeah, you just like our 3 questions tonight, just send us a question, a topic, something you want to hear us talk about. Don't even worry. Like, we'll figure out how to turn it into something listenable. But what we really want is, and really the whole goal of this show has been from the get-go, is that we want to share our ideas with you in hopes that it will help your games to be more, better, fun.
More fun, more better.
More fun, more better. That's really the whole goal here. Is to make is that if you have a question about a thing, we can just assume other people do too. So if there's anything that we can from the ridiculous amount of years that combined, the two of us have been gaming. I mean, sheer decades of years between the two of us for GMing that we probably have an idea about whatever, at least a thought or two on whatever your topic is. We want to do that, and we want to help you. So, and then, for the rest of you, we're hoping we're just entertaining. Okay. So if you like what we do here or elsewhere on the Misdirected Mark Network, please consider supporting the Patreon campaign. Patrons get access to the Bamboo Lounge, of which we'll be talking about Xena in a moment. The Misdirected Mark After Show. They get we lift up the curtain and invite them into the Slack room, our Slack community. I love our Slack community. I don't know how else to say it. It's been like a oasis, a shelter during this pandemic. And I love hanging out with those people, and we have Friday lunches together on Zoom. It's really just delightful, just all around delightful. So anyway, you get access to all those things. And your patronage keeps the lights on here in the Misdirected Mark Network. I don't know. I mean, it's really important to us. Like,
yeah, we like having lights, and
microphones,
mics
software, hosting costs, backups. Like it costs. It's not free to do all of this, and so your support makes it possible. And for that, we are very thankful for all of your support. Now, if you are a patron of the show, thank you very much. If you are unable to be a patron of the show, totally understand. There's still a thing you can do to help us. You know it. I know it. We don't even have to beat around the bush. If you listen to us, you will love us. Tell people, not that they haven't heard it before, but just remind them real quick, how can they help with that effort?
Yeah, you could leave us a rating or review on Apple Podcast or the podcatcher of your choice, because every new review we get really does actually help new people find the show, which is great. And thank you so much to everybody who's already left a review. We really, really super appreciate you. Or you could just tell people about us on Twitter. We really like that too. That's been happening recently, and it just fills my heart with joy. And it does. It works. And it makes my heart warm.
That has also worked. People have recommended us on Twitter, and then other people have gone and listened and was like, "Oh, the show's dope." We appreciate that.
Help us with our failed SEO attempt at podcast naming.
Yeah, look, whatever way you can pass us along, hand us out, use our name, just let people know. Cool. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Good. Yeah.
Say, Senda. What do you show me, right? Is that the word I use?
Yeah. We got there.
Show me how we should set up a group GM'd Star Trek game.
Show me what you got, 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 show me what you got.
This show is a joint production of She's a Super Geek and Misdirected Mark Productions, the media arm of Encoded Designs.
Show me what you got, 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 show me what you got.
Click, click, click.
Click.
But I'm not saying the thing that I said the other time. No,
you already
not
said
making any
it.
Reference to the song.
It was 2:37. It wasn't that many ago.
Yeah. No. Nope. Not doing that.
Don't do the thing.
Oh no. Oh no.
Oh no.
There was I'll tell you really quick and then we'll jump in the show. There was a skit on Saturday Night Live this week called Gen Z Hospital.
Oh no.
Where the doctor and it's like the doctor's trying to talk to this group of Gen Zers using all the, straight up cap, like all the terms, right? Which is funny because I have a Gen Zer, roaming through my house and says all those things. So it was quite funny. But they had a video. They were like, "Oh, well, we can show you the video of your friend getting hurt," and it was the "Oh no, oh no, no, no." I thought that was pretty funny.
That is pretty funny.
Yeah. That's what made me think of it. Okay.
We should start.
Yeah, we should get into this. Okay. Do.
May I grab your bag?